Stryker as early as 2008. Stryker itself would not likely be used in Iraq if there's a war this year, at least until further field tests are completed. For more on business, click on themarketwatch.com, AOL keyword MarketWatch. Charlie Turner 1010 wins at themarketwatch.com Wall Street Bureau.
Money Watch 26 and 56 past every hour on 1010 wins. Wins News Time.
This is before dinner because the port's going to breathe.
De toekomst is de grootste vijand van iedereen die streeft naar zekerheid. En dat geldt zeker voor een tijd waarin oorlog en terrorisme dreigt en alle economische signalen op rood staan. Daarom nodigde Jim Rogers, een van de grootste privé-investeerders ter wereld, 2 gasten uit om bij hem thuis aan de Riverside Drive in New York de wereld onder de loep te nemen. Want een investeerder moet iedere dag de toekomst opnieuw verkennen. De eerste gast is de Amerikaan Daniel Yergin, econoom en oliedeskundige, adviseur van de Amerikaanse regering en net terug uit Davos, waar jaarlijks de temperatuur van de wereldeconomie wordt opgenomen. De tweede is Marc Faber, een Zwitsers investeerder die sinds 1972 vanuit Hongkong opereert en net in Europa zijn nieuwste boek Tomorrow's Gold presenteerde. Is de tweede globaliseringsgolf aan zijn eind gekomen en gaan we net als in 1914 tijden van grote onzekerheid tegemoet? Of is er ook nog hoop om in te investeren?
I got to figure out what to do next. You know, we've had a long period of X in the market. What's going to happen in the next 5 years? What's going to happen how are we going to survive all this? How are we going to survive, and how are we going to get rich?
So I think we all need those answers, but I think you've just turned in your book, so in one sentence, tell us.
I'm not going to make any money off my book. I assure you of that. You probably know that. Well, you probably make you guys make money off your books.
No, you don't make money off.
But I'm not going to get rich off my book.
Yeah.
But you know, one could say that after the Second World War, we had you know, the world started opening up again. Globalization, GATT, WHO, everything started opening up. Berlin Wall fell. Things opened up even more. But then the World Trade Center fell. So are we at the end of an era? With the beginning of an era? What kind of what's going on?
Yeah, but I think I'd like to point out, people say the last 2 or 3 years were so bad, but that's not true at all. If last year you held cash, euros, you're up 20% against the US dollar. If you held gold since April 2001, you're up more than 40% against the US dollar. If you owned real estate in the US or the UK, real estate prices have been firm. So I think the problem is not that the markets have been bad. Bonds have done very well. Government bonds have done very well. It's that people were ill-positioned because they bought the wrong thing at the wrong time.
I couldn't agree more. But what do we do now? I got to do something now. I own gold. I own some real estate. Look around you.
You know, the thing is, do you want to start with the investment thesis, or should we start with the kind of
What's
the big picture?
What's going to happen to the world? That's better. Let's start with the world.
Yes, the world is easy.
Okay.
It's easy.
Oh, quick. All right, the world. What's going to happen in the world in the next 5 or 10 years?
I think what is happening now is that the Fed is pumping money into the system. That boosts consumption in the US and it leads to a credit bubble. But the production doesn't grow in the US, but it grows in China, in Vietnam, in India and other places. So we have actually a Fed policy that is designed to almost impoverish America and transfer the wealth to countries that are producing the goods that are then consumed in the United States.
You do raise that one question, which, you know, that gnawing question, which where you live looms large. Is China eventually going to become the low-cost source of everything?
Well, there's no question in my mind anyway. But let's just suppose, Mark, I mean, I happen to agree with you, but let's just suppose you're right. Is the U.S. going to sit back and let that happen? Are we going to close off? Are we going to become protectionist? Are we going to close our markets? Are we going to close our currency? How are we going to deal with the fact
I think, you know, a lot of people, they are concerned that the world will become protectionist again and that you will have high import duties. But actually, for the US, this would be self-defeating because the US has a low rate of inflation precisely because China is producing goods more cheaply than anybody else. And so they are putting pressure on the prices of manufactured products.
Mark, you just got through saying gold has been going up, all these things have been going up. I have a commodity index fund, which is up 80% in the last 4 years. How can you say prices are going down?
Well, that's the point.
Oil is up. I mean, oil has gone through the roof. Tell this man, oil has tripled.
I want to explain to you. Following the breakdown...
Well, not tripled, but it's...
Well, it's tripled since in the last 4 years. Since I left to go around the world.
Oh, that's right. We had that's right.
Since
The Asian crisis.
1998.
Yeah, that's right. Since the collapse.
Yes, when I left in January of 1999.
So much for stability in markets and price bands.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, but if you listen to that stuff on TV, you know it's wrong.
Right. But, I think you're raising the bigger question, which is, of course, about globalization and did something end on September 11th? Did something end with the end of the stock market bubble in this country and so forth? And, I think that question kind of hangs over everything else. And, of course, we all know that there was a first stage of globalization, incredibly optimistic time. 50 million people moved to the United States without passports, new technologies, the Internet of the age, which is the telegraph. And it was supposedly going to go on forever, and it ended in June of 1914.
August of 1914.
The Archduke.
Okay. But the question is, what do we do now? Is that happening again? Are we now going to close off again? Are we going to have a third world war? Are we going to kill each other?
Well,
Should I leave New York?
No. Something did change. I mean, I think we can look back now with the wisdom of a couple of years of hindsight and say that the 1990s really was the second age of globalization. One of the things was grossly underestimated was the question of security and safety. There was a conceit in the United States and other countries that everybody wanted to be just like everybody else. We discovered that that's not true. Are computers going to get slower? Is the internet going to disappear? I don't think so, but we now face, is it going to be a relatively well-functioning world, which is you're asking, or is it going to be a fragmented world? Are we going to see states and governments much more powerful because security is there? I think these are the open questions, and you can only approach them through scenarios.
Do you think there's any chance that the U.S. would change its policies and stop making so many enemies? I mean, one of the reasons this is happening is the U.S. has made a lot of mistakes in the last 10 years.
Well,
I mean, we've got troops in Saudi Arabia, the holiest land of Islam. We've got Christian troops there. When I drove through Saudi Arabia, everybody kept saying to me, suppose we had Muslim troops in Rome. How would you feel? I mean, a lot of people are angry about that. You know our policy in Pakistan. We were bitter enemies with Pakistan until September 12th, 2001. Now they're suddenly our friend. Well, there's anti-Americanism all over Pakistan.
So are you kind of saying it's kind of America's fault?
No, I'm not saying it's America's fault, but so far after September 11th, we in America said, we need justice, swift justice. I couldn't agree more with that. I suspect you both would agree. We need swift justice. Okay, but at the same time, I would have thought somebody would have said, well, let's see, are we doing something wrong? Maybe we need to re-examine our policies to see if at the same time we're having swift justice, we can also re-examine our policies. I haven't seen any of that.
Well, I think that one of the things that, in a sense, we thought that all the security issues and all those things would take care of themselves, and that we didn't, in a sense, all we really needed to worry about was opening up markets, opening up trade, and you get an integrated world and everything would work well and standards of living would be raised. And of course, we found that's not the case.
But what happens now? Does America close off? I mean, Mark, you said we're going to debase the dollar, we're going to drive the dollar down. If we drive the dollar down, doesn't that make the U.S. economy much more competitive and much more vibrant?
Not necessarily. Countries that have a weak currency, they usually don't gain much in terms of competitiveness. And by the way, the US dollar would have to decline by, say, 80% against the Chinese RMB to be competitive. That is unlikely to happen. Wow. But I think the wider issue is, why is the US not particularly popular? Because they have this belief that they are kind of a new empire in the world, the way the Romans were an empire. And nobody has ever liked empires, because empires have always bullied people around. I mean, the Romans, they crucified people. A good example, they crucified Jesus Christ because They didn't like. He was considered to be a rebel.
Look at, I mean, so we'll stop buying goods from Asia. We'll stop buying goods from the other parts of the world.
I beg your pardon?
Well, what is this American empire that supposedly? I mean, isn't part of the reason people just don't like the United States is because the United States did very well in the 1990s, and people didn't like who weren't doing so well.
Well, I know countries such as Cambodia and Laos that have been carpet bombed, that didn't particularly enjoy the carpet bombing, as an example.
But Daniel, you said we did well. We worried about what about the future. That is the past. You're right. We made a lot of enemies. But okay, how can you say in the 90s we did well? We have the largest balance of trade deficit the world has ever seen in the 90s.
Well,
I mean, our trade balance is, we're the largest debtor nation in the world by a factor of many, many times.
Well, I guess how can we do well compared to the Europeans who created no jobs? We created 20 million jobs in the 1990s. That's not a and they were not hamburger flippers as people said they would be at the beginning of the decade. They turned out to be service jobs. They turned out to be many of them better paid jobs. Also, we absorbed populations from, maybe people don't like the United States, but they sure want to move to the United States and live there.
That is correct. That I agree with you. Nobody likes the U.S., but everybody gives everything to get to the U.S.
I heard a statistic that 44% of the, I wonder if it's true, that 44% of the people who live in New York City were not born in the United States.
I think that is probably true, yes. In the greater New York, I think it's probably very, very true. Yeah, but a lot of people want to come to New York. There's no question people want to come to the U.S. Is that going to continue? Are we going to let them in? Are we going to let them in the next 10 years? Are we going to close off again? You remember the 1920s, we closed off. Yeah. You know, in the 30s, we closed off.
I mean, what we had is we had 20 years, you know, we had this incredible era of globalization, you know, and it took until after World War II to begin laying the institutions to restore it. So things can not merely go wrong, that they can go very wrong.
Well, that's why we have, after the Second World War, everybody said, look, we're not going to have beggar thy neighbor anymore. We're not going to close the tariff. We're not going to close off the borders. We're not going to close off the markets. We're going to have GATT. We're going to have WHO. I mean, but will that continue is my worry.
Well, a lot of it. What do you think? I mean, do you think it's...
Well, I'm afraid...
I mean, you're asking the question so many times, you obviously have a point of view.
No, I want answers. I need answers, because if I don't get answers, then I can't afford
What is your own
Well, I'm afraid that we in the U.S., Mark is exactly right, we're going to drive the currency down. We're going to debase the currency. There's no question about that.
That's a conscious policy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, this has been spelled out by the Fed.
Yes, the Federal Reserve, the chairman of the Federal Reserve and the new governor have said, we are going to print money. We're going to drive prices up. Remember, he said, if you don't believe that, we've got printing presses and we can. So we know they're going to debase it.
Do you see that as a response to the specter of deflation?
Whatever it is, it's going to happen. I don't care what's the response. It's going to happen. So I'm trying to figure out what to do next. So we know the U.S. dollar is going to go down. I know. You seem to think the market.
The question is against what?
Well, it's going to go down certainly against.
The question is against what?
Well, it's going to go down
against the yen. Not very likely.
Well, I own the yen, I own the euro, I own the Singapore dollar, I own the Australia, I own a lot of currencies.
Yeah, sure. I believe you because you're a rich young man. But, you know, people of more modest means, they may only have a choice of one currency. So I look at it this way. We have in the world 4 major currencies. The dollar, euro, yen, paper money, and one hard currency, gold. And then we have one more future major currency, is the Chinese RMB. The Chinese RMB is the soundest currency in the world in terms of paper money. Gold is the only currency where the supply cannot be increased indefinitely. In other words, it cannot be monetized.
Why is the RMB the strongest currency? Because of the reserves they hold? Or?
It's the soundest economy in the world at the present time. Last year, the Americans, they print money. Industrial production here is flat to down, no investments activity. But in China, industrial production is up 19%.
So do you see China just marching along 8% growth a year, no bumps in the road?
Well, in America, between 1800 and 1915, there was this tremendous growth in the country, the industrialization. They had 15 financial crises and the Civil War, and yet you had progress. For sure, in China, you will have crises. And I think within the next 5 years, you'll have a political and economic crisis. But the trend is towards a very strong China economically and politically.
What do you think the political crisis will look like?
I think it will come via
that's probably
the
one of the
financial system.
things. Yeah.
It will come via the financial system, and when the whole thing collapses, then people will say, well, they will point their fingers at some government officials.
You mean the banking system, the debt?
The banking system and the state enterprise system. And then the entrepreneurial class, which is now rising, the ones that have no connections to the government, they'll take over at that stage. And then you have a better kind of government in terms of you have more rules and regulations rather than just administration by the wills and whims of some leading politicians at the present time.
If I could make an analogy, if you had bought New York in 1903, in 1907 there was a huge panic, financial panic. You would have been brilliant to buy that financial panic. If Mark is right, in 2007 there's going to be a financial panic in China. I, for one, am going to be buying it. I happen to own the renminbi, but what you ask about why is it so sound, they have a balance of trade surplus, huge balance of trade surplus. We in the U.S. have a huge deficit. They have the second largest foreign currency reserves in the world. We're the largest debtor nation the world has ever seen. So, I mean, I cannot get enthusiastic about putting money in the U.S. I would love to. I live here. I mean, I love the U.S. But I mean, I got to be realistic. I can't go. I mean, I can go broke out of patriotism, but I just as soon not.
But I'd like to add one more point. You see, in China, every year they say 500,000 engineers coming out of technical schools and universities. The same number comes out of schools in India. And these people, they have very low salaries. They frequently don't come from established families. They're prepared to work 100 or 200 hours a week to make it up because the competition is so stiff. And these are people, they don't go skiing over the weekend and boating in summertime. They work every day of the week. And I have to say, I was never very optimistic about internet stocks, but I think the internet allows every citizen anywhere in the world to acquire the knowledge of people like yourself in the last village of a country. So there's tremendous knowledge transfer, and I think that people, they always say, oh, we in America and we in Western Europe, we have the knowledge and the know-how and so forth. But actually these people, the Indians and the Chinese, will acquire that very quickly, and in 5 years' time you will see the big thing will be research labs in China and in India, because to carry out research in these countries is maybe 10% of what it costs here in the US and in Western Europe.
Mark is dead right about China. You can go across China on the best highways in the world. You will find people who work from dawn to dusk in China. Everybody.
Yes.
They save and invest. They save 30 or 40% of their income.
Yes.
India is dead wrong on all of that. They have the worst highway system in the world. Drive it.
I agree.
They have the worst telephone system. They may have a few people, but they all leave India.
No, actually I have to correct you. Haiti has the worst road system in the world, but India is close behind it.
Well, I can tell. Well,
India looms a little larger in population.
Kenya's got the worst. Kenya, with them. Let's not get off on that. But just before we get off into India, and well, let's keep going this way. But will terrorism destroy this whole what we're talking about? Will terrorism end? Will it just make the closing off of countries even worse?
But actually, we have to analyze what are the causes of terrorism. Terrorism is a symptom of a world where you have a lot of people that have nothing to lose. And basically this is one of the problems of globalization, or the problem existed already before, that you have a lot of people that have been disenfranchised, and a relatively small number of people, the multinationals, did relatively well in the 1990s. So the people that have nothing to lose, of course, they're more likely to be, suicide candidates for terrorism than the ones that have something.
If you look at your own part of the world, if you look at Asia, and you look at the beginning of the 1990s and at the end of the 1990s, even after the Asian financial crisis, certainly people's standard of living. I mean, Singapore's per capita income is higher than that of Britain's, and Britain has a 200, and it had a 200-year head start. So, I mean, there is this one part of the world, the Middle East, that in a sense has not been part of this process. And some would say it has to do with the nature of the governments and the nature of the society.
Yeah, sure. But I have to tell you, in Asia, if you look at US dollar per capita incomes, today it is lower in Indonesia than it was in 1990. And in Thailand, it is practically the same. So it is true that some countries like Singapore and Taiwan and South Korea, they have progressed somewhat in the 1990s, but a lot of them, they haven't.
Indonesia's a big problem.
And I would say even in India, because of the currency depreciation, today's GDP per capita is no higher than 10 years ago. But I take the point that in general, there has been some progress in the 1990s in emerging economies, particularly in Asia, and specifically, of course, in China. I mean, if you compare China 1990 and today, it's like day and night.
Right.
But
Same for Vietnam.
But will terrorism come to an end? You say there's this hopeless class out there. Are we going to have terrorism, low-grade terrorism?
The system will attack us where we are vulnerable. They're not going to attack us in the air. They're going to attack us with our weapons or with biological weapons or make life difficult through attacks, hackers in computers and so forth.
So you think it's going to get worse?
Of course it will get worse, much worse over time.
So where does it end?
It will end. We have to try to understand the other countries better than we understand them at the present time and be more lenient to them.
What I'm trying to figure out, you're saying that the terrorism is going to get worse. Continue.
Yes, continue.
You think it's going to continue?
Some think it'll be a half a generation battle.
So that's a long time. That's the 10 years I'm worried about. So what do I do? So both of you all seem to agree, I happen to agree with Mark, that maybe there are ways to stop it, but we're not going to, the U.S. is not going to change its policy, so it's going to get worse. It's going to
Well,
go
I just think that the
So what do we
constant,
do?
the U.S. it's a little overdone. It's very typical, and I was in Davos, and I heard this at Davos. It's all the U.S.'s fault. I just really think that there is a bigger world. There are a lot of other players in this world.
What I said was, it's not going to change.
Right. Okay.
Right or wrong, it's not going to change. For the purposes of this discussion, I'm not making a value judgment. I'm saying it's not going to change, for better or for worse. So what's going to happen? I'm having a daughter in May, my first child. Where should I take her to rear her? Should I rear her in the U.S. or should I rear her somewhere else?
New Zealand.
Boring. I have money in New Zealand, but I'm not sure I'd want to be in New Zealand.
Yeah, sure, I agree, but in general, depends what is your ambition. Is the education of your daughter to make money for her in future and to be in a thriving country? Then I would take her probably to Asia.
Well, but that's why I asked both of you. Both said that there's going to be, the terrorism is going to continue. I happen to concur. I don't see a change for better or for worse. Do I want to sit here in New York? Do I want to sit in London? Do I want to sit in Boston?
Yes,
the U.S. dollar is going to go do you happen to, do you think?
I mean, I'm here in the presence of experts. I will defer to you all.
Experts.
Is the price of oil going higher?
I think in the near term, once we're through these crises, they'll come down again.
Okay, so for at least for a while, the dollar is going to go.
I think the price of oil will go up long term.
I do too. I'm very, very optimistic. The surprise will be how strong the price of oil stays. But you're the expert on oil.
Well,
but that's not about the reason I asked that, because we all agree that the dollar is going to go down against oil, at least for a while, at least for the short term. So the dollar is going to go down. How do you see the U.S. in this scenario we're talking about? The U.S. economy, the U.S. currency, the U.S. everything.
Well, I think, beyond what the Fed does or doesn't do, you can certainly feel that malaise in terms of confidence that translates into not investing, people just, kind of holding back, animal spirits checked, and we're still, of course, as you guys know better than I, aren't we still going to spend some time digging out of the rubble of this bubble?
Okay, so that would sound to me like, with the terrorism that's going to continue, says all of us, then the U.S. is not the place to be. So far we all seem to think that Asia, although we have different ideas of Asia, I'm not bullish.
I don't hear any of you saying Japan.
Well, in a minute I will say Japan. I'm not the least bit bullish on India. I'm wildly bullish on Shanghai and China. I may move to Shanghai. I'm that bullish. Japan, he brings up a good question. Is Japan part of Asia?
It is part of Asia.
I've got a globe too, but as far as this new world.
Well, I think something very interesting is happening, because for as long as China was closed, the other Asian exporting countries had, of course, little competition, and the other economies compared to China were relatively small. Starting 1978, China opens up, and nothing much happened until the late 1980s. But after that, the Chinese were really becoming major competitors to the other exporting countries. And I think now what you have is in Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, companies closing down production in these countries and moving their production to China. So macroeconomically, each time a company closes down in Japan and moves to China, it's negative for the economy in Japan, but it's positive for the corporate profits of that corporation because they can shift their production to a lower cost country. And I think what you may find is that for the next 10 years, there's no Japanese economic growth. Macroeconomically, the country looks horrible, but that the stock market will go up. It's one of the few stock markets that has a higher dividend yield than the bond yield, and where the ownership of equities is very minimal compared to, say, Western Europe and especially to the US. So I think money can shift out of bonds into equities. Bonds go down and equities go up.
I happen to own Japanese shares too, because in Japan right now, despondency, the suicide rate is the highest in history. The birth rate is the lowest in history. University graduates want to go to work for the government. There is despondency everywhere. That's the kind of place where you're supposed to invest. Doesn't mean I won't lose a lot of money, or more too. I'm more optimistic on the yen than he is, because the dollar, mainly I'm
But you don't see some grand Japanese crisis.
There has been a grand Japanese crisis
at the present time, but I think the crisis will become worse.
That would affect the world economy, or is Japan so
too small,
too turned on into itself?
And even if it does have a crisis, it will make the crisis in the U.S. even worse because they are our creditor.
Yes, exactly. Yes, that is the point.
A crisis in Japan is a semi-crisis in Japan is a crisis in the U.S.
So what are you going to do when Mr. Greenspan's term comes to an end and they make you the head of the Federal Reserve?
Oh, my God. You're kidding? I wouldn't take that job.
But tell us what you would do when you think about it for an hour.
I would drive interest rates higher as fast as I could.
Yes, that's a good idea. I would do exactly the same.
Which would eliminate a lot of excess capacity in the U.S. You'd get rid of the dead wood. You know, when you have a garden, you prune the trees and then the tree can bloom again. I would prune all the dead wood. We've got Speaking of Japan, the U.S. Federal Reserve says to the Japanese, you need to write off your bad debts, you need to clean out your balance sheets, you need to stop carrying all those zombie companies. But at the same time in the U.S., the Federal Reserve is carrying the zombie companies. Yes. We've driven interest rates to nothing. Lucent Technology is still in business. WorldCom is still in business. What you need to do is put all those companies out of business. You raise interest rates, you get rid of the dead wood, and the whole system starts up. It causes pain. It causes pain for a month or a year or 2 years. But look what's happened in Japan. They've had pain for 13 years. Yeah. Which do you prefer? 13 years of pain and another semi-crisis, or 2 years of pain and get it over with?
Yes, I would say for capitalism, the most important is that companies go out of business, the bad ones, and that the good ones survive. If you have a system where you support bad companies, you have not survival of the fittest, but survival of the weakest.
Well, let's turn then, if we're talking about that, we've talked about Asia, we've talked about the U.S., let's turn and talk about Europe. I guess the Netherlands has perhaps one of the 2 or 3 most flexible economies in Europe. But most, you wouldn't say that?
No. Well, there's some great things about the Netherlands. I own shares in the Netherlands.
But labor market compared to, say, Germany?
Oh, okay. There's some, but you know that the Netherlands has the highest rate of handicapped people in the world. They have 12% of the population is handicapped. You know why? Because you get very special benefits if you're handicapped. And so everybody's handicapped. I mean, it's the greatest rip-off of the system, one of the greatest rip-offs of the system in the world. But listen, I'm very bullish on the Netherlands, don't misunderstand. But let's talk about Europe. I own the euro. I happen to think that currency is better than the US dollar. I don't think the euro is going to survive 10 years from now,
really, you think
15 years from now. It'll break up and disappear. But I'd rather own it.
Rather than the 3 or 4 natural currency pools?
No, I think it will work, actually. I'm very optimistic about the euro.
Wouldn't it be such a...
You don't think... Okay.
Yeah, I mean...
I think it will survive. First of all, I go a lot to conferences. At the present time, everybody's so down on Europe and everybody thinks it's not going to perform well, and that's why there have been these huge flows of funds into the US for the last 4 years, financing the current account deficit. But actually, I think that the inclusion of so many Eastern European countries into Euroland would be very good for Western Europe because it will break the power of the unions. And actually last year when people say the markets were bad, in Western Europe the stock markets went down, in the US, but all Eastern European markets went up. Romania was up more than 100%. Bulgaria, Estonia, Slovakia up 50%.
In euros or in local currency?
No, in euros. I'm talking about euros. And so we had actually a convergence play beginning last year where, real estate in Eastern Europe and the stock markets going up, and in Western Europe going down.
The inclusion of those countries, is that going to be the solution to the population problems in Western Europe?
Yeah, I think it's very good because there will be a lot of immigration and, factories will shift to Eastern Europe and so forth. So there'll be cross currents, but I think in general, the population will be enlarged, the zone will be enlarged, and we will have a Europe that has a big economic zone.
I think that Europe is making a mistake bringing in those countries. What I think Europe should do is bring in Turkey, because Turkey has 70 million people. Turkey is an unbelievably young country. The countries you're talking about have a declining population and a declining birth rate. Turkey is very vibrant. They have a very, very good manufacturing base, and that would solve a lot of Europe's...
a strong entrepreneurial
very
culture.
Strong entrepreneurial culture. This new government is terrific. I happen to have confidence in the new government. So if Europe would bring in Turkey, which they probably won't, but if they would bring in Turkey...
There seems to be a certain degree of opposition.
Yeah, because, they say because they're not Europeans. What they mean is they're not white. But that's outrageous, if you ask me, and because they're not Christians. Well, who cares if they're not Christians, if they're not white?
I agree we should bring in Turkey and Iraq. Then we also have some oil. So that would solve a lot of problems.
It would also make up for the decline in the North Sea.
Yes, but I would say one point about this whole Middle Eastern expedition. I think nobody wants the Americans to control Middle Eastern oil, certainly not the Chinese and certainly not the Russians. So I think you will have... I beg your pardon?
Nor do the Iranians, nor do the Saudis.
Yes, exactly. So, I think
there's a lot of fantasy on that question, actually. I don't think that the U.S. goals here is actually to control Middle Eastern oil. I know that it's probably, many people don't believe that. I think you may agree or disagree and not agree with what the administration is doing, but I don't think they would be engaged in what they're doing or taking the risks what they're doing if they were not concerned about, in their view, weapons of mass destruction. They may be wrong about it, but I think that's what's motivating them. These people are not people who focus excessively on oil. Anyway, you can buy the oil.
But actually, the U.S. presumably they also.
And by the way, the U.S. doesn't get the oil from the Middle East.
Can I ask? The U.S. presumably has some weapons of mass destruction. Okay. So, as a world citizen, I just ask: only one country, or can everybody have?
Well, you don't like the U.S., I guess.
No, I didn't say I don't like.
You're suspicious of it.
I don't think that one country alone should have.
Well, actually, there are 15 countries that have weapons of mass destruction. India, Pakistan, Israel, the U.S., France, Britain, Germany, Russia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Russia. I can name 15.
So coming back to your question, where you should move somewhere very far away.
Far away from what?
From weapons of mass destruction.
You're back to New Zealand.
All right, but wait, you were making a point about oil. You said that they should take in Iraq, they should take in Turkey and take in Iraq, because then they would have oil. Yes. Were you going to? Was that a thought, or was that a?
No, were you going to develop think, in general, I think that for Europe to become larger will be a plus, because it will break the rigidity of the system of the Western European systems at the present time. They'll bring new cultures, new people, and so forth. They'll be harder working, and production will shift partly to Eastern Europe, so the costs will be lowered. Europe will become more competitive. But I know everybody's bearish about Western Europe. I tend to be more optimistic because I think that the statistics in the US have been doctored for the last 10 years,
yes.
Especially in terms of productivity. And so I think that we in Europe...
You don't agree with Mr. Greenspan on
No, not at all. I think
Please,
he's...
do you?
I'm just listening to the expert.
I know that the figures about productivity and inflation are doctored, butchered.
Yes.
They're a sham.
Yes.
Total sham.
How do you...
Look, I just told you that the commodities are up 80% in the last 4 or 5 years, and yet if you listen to the U.S. government, they will tell you that there is no price increases. They will tell you that the price of oil, you know what, in November they said the price of heating oil went down 11%. Get out the numbers that they told you. I call him up. I say, how could it be down 11%? The Wall Street Journal says it's up 25%. My oil man says it's up over 25%. How can you say it's... But the United States government reported in November of 2002 the price of heating oil was down 11%, and therefore there was no price inflation in that month.
So you think that somebody there is calling up saying, hey, fake the numbers,
I know.
Joe.
I've had BLS guys write me and say, look, we were told that we have to smooth out the numbers. I know they're faking the numbers.
Yes,
But
and
so
in
does the
terms
rest
of
of the world.
productivity, there's a lot of hedonic adjustments and so forth. And also, it's measured on a 40 hours a week. Now, if you work 41 hours or just half an hour longer, it makes a huge difference on productivity numbers. And a lot of people work from their homes, so that is not in the figures. In a service economy, lots of people, they work at night and so forth. So
do you think the GDP numbers are fake too?
I know they're fake. The
well,
whole
but
thing is fake.
we would have to define it. How do you define GDP growth? If you spend more, then theoretically GDP has increased. But if the production is all in another country, it's a questionable growth, especially if it's financed by additional debt. This is, the issue. To what extent is the debt growth in this country sustainable in the long run? And I agree with Jimmy. I think this country will have difficult economic times. I'm not saying that the others won't have also difficult times, but this country will have a time when the dollar will weaken. Now the question, as I said, is against what? I think it will be against the basket of commodities.
But wait a minute, do you think that the French are going to work 40 hours a week? The Germans are going to stop taking 7 weeks vacation every year? Do you think the Dutch are going to start being handicapped?
I think at some stage the standards of living in Western society will go down, where people will have to work more or they'll have to take lower standards of living, because we have a huge wealth transfer at the moment.
But to do that, obviously, you face these immensely difficult questions about reforming the welfare states, reforming labor markets.
Correct.
Not
Correct.
easy.
Correct.
Often you can only do it when you're in a crisis.
Yeah, this is the point also about China. You see, at the present time, China has a set of problems, but nobody addresses the problems, just postpone them. And eventually you have the crisis, and that's when problems get solved. And I think the welfare state of Europe will also be solved one day in a crisis when it's physically impossible to pay the benefits to the retirees.
Well, let's just assume that Europe gets better. I have investments in Europe too.
Mm-hmm.
Let's assume the dollar goes down. Let's assume Asia gets better, which we all seem to agree on. Let's assume that there's going to be terrorism, which we all seem to agree on, for better or for worse, not making a value judgment. Doesn't that mean that if China right now, for instance, I don't know if you knew this, as of 2002, China is the largest importing nation in the world, larger than the U.S. For the past 100 years, either the UK or the US has been the largest importing nation in the world. China is now. Doesn't this mean the world's that the price of oil has to go higher, the price of zinc has to go higher, the price of everything has to go higher?
Well, that's where it is. I think that one of the really key dates was 1993. You say, what happened in 1993? China went from being self-sufficient to becoming a net importer of oil. And that's a very profound impact on the world. I think you'll see pipelines. I think that in the future, the relationship between China and Russia, instead of being based upon Marx and Lenin, will be based on oil and gas.
So prices are going to go higher.
Yes, you see.
Well, we see. But when we look out, in our work, we look out and we see oil supply increasing 20%. We're not bearish on supply.
Okay.
But even it goes up 20%, so what? You see, in the US, you have 285 million people and you consume 22 million barrels of oil a day. In Asia, we have 3.6 billion people and we consume 19 million barrels a day. So in other words, the per capita consumption here is 10 times higher than in Asia. I think in China, I can bet you whatever you want, the demand for food and energy will go up, because as standards of living rise, there's an exponential growth in the demand for energy.
Well, let me ask you, this growth in imports into China, that's quite a striking statistic you have. What is it? Is it mainly commodities that are coming into China? Are they importing manufacturers from anybody else?
It's mainly commodities, obviously,
Yes.
because they are producing. They're taking in zinc and cotton and oil
Coffee,
and whatever.
cocoa.
And they are producing good, they're consuming, and they're producing. 20 years ago, the first time I went to China, the Chinese would say to each other, we say hello, they say, have you eaten today? That was the way you greeted. they had chicken once a year. Now they have chicken every day. They have pork, they have beef. They eat better than I do.
But the per capita consumption of fish, meat, fruits, milk in Hong Kong, Taiwan, which is also Chinese, is still 10 times higher than in China.
Yes.
You know, I give you statistics. In Switzerland, the per capita consumption of coffee is 50 times higher than in China.
We're in Switzerland?
Yes, but because the Chinese population is 200 times larger than the Swiss population, they're already a bigger coffee market in terms of imports into China than Switzerland. So the Chinese will not drink as much coffee as the Swiss, nor will they ever be as obese as the Americans, but they can go to the South Korean or Taiwanese or Japanese level one day. And that will boost the per capita consumption of, grains especially, of energy, coffee, cocoa, sugar dramatically.
Do you all believe that China will eventually be the low-cost source of everything?
For manufactured goods, there's only one country that can compete with them at the present time, and that's Vietnam. But for commodities, and especially for agricultural commodities, they have a problem with the water problem. There's not enough water in China, so that they'll have to import. Plus, the Chinese are very smart. They're not, moving the heavy artillery throughout the world. What they do is they become very good customers of other countries, so they gain economic influence on countries like Indonesia, Myanmar, Australia, all the African countries. So they'll have their connections throughout the world, and suddenly it will be a huge geopolitical power. Huge.
They are the largest customer in the world now. Everybody tries to be nice to their customer. Yeah. The best investment advice I can give you, although I want investment advice, teach your children Chinese.
My son is already determined. He's about to go to college, and he wants to take Mandarin Chinese freshman year. First year, I say, wait till your second year. But
whatever he wants to do. The best advice. I hope that my new daughter learns Chinese. I hope I learn Chinese because
you should open an English school in China. Because they all want to learn English so they can work and do business with Western countries.
I could do both. I could have a school in China for foreigners to learn Chinese and to teach the Chinese.
So you say, but the reason to learn Chinese is because that's where the world economy will be moving.
The 19th century was the century of the UK, the 20th century was the century of the US, the 21st century is going to be the century of China, whether we like it or not. Asia is certainly booming, and that's where I would be putting money, and I'd be getting money out of every day, not every day, but every week I move money out of the US.
And what do you move it into? I mean, commodities?
That's why you're here, Daniel.
No, you've been doing it. We want to know.
I'll tell you what a good play is in Asia. I would buy real estate in Shanghai. Shanghai will one day have a bigger stock market capitalization than the US. Absolutely. The way Japan.
So you don't see some really big bump on the road in China?
I see huge bumps. But these bumps will shake the system, and then they'll move on. And
we had huge bumps here.
But we didn't. Yeah, I guess we had, as you said, we had our Civil War, which tested our political system. But bumps that would really transform the political system in China.
The U.S. government went bankrupt 2 or 3 times. Don't you know? J.P. Morgan had to go down to Washington and bail them out. Actually, they came to New York.
And in fact, I would say that no matter what people say, the political system in China wasn't all that bad, because without the system such as we have in China, we could never have this progress in such a short time. So what the government did say in Shanghai says, you 100,000 people, you move to the right, and you 100,000 to the left, and here is the bridge, and here is the tunnel, and here is the highway. In the Netherlands and in Switzerland, they object for 50 years to build a tunnel or a new bridge, and nothing gets ever done.
Mark and I seem to think that the globalization is more likely that things are going to fracture again.
Not work so well.
I mean, what is your...
Well, here, I think of poor Norman Angell, who before the First World War wrote this book called The Great Illusion, which people always said that he said that World War I couldn't happen because things were too interconnected. It's not actually what he said. He said that if there was a war, the economic consequences because of the interconnection would be much worse. And he was right. He was right. It took Second World War, it took the 30s. He was really right. So, you can see where the things can get on this slope and just not work. And you have to leave room for people to make serious blunders, which is what happens in history. The other side of it is I prefer to, maybe for sanity, to sort of veer towards being a little optimistic that kind of wisdom will prevail, and that We won't go over the
Well,
cliff.
why will wisdom prevail if you think that? I mean, I'd like to know, because
Yeah.
if wisdom's going to prevail, I do entirely different things with my life, my money, with everything. Why will wisdom prevail?
Why will it prevail? That the kind of institutions that really, and the kind of international culture that emerged out of the last disaster that emerged after 1945 will have enough vitality in them.
Daniel, you're right, but they're all dead. Nobody remembers it except you and me and Mark. I mean, we're the ones who, and we remember because we've read about it. Most people don't read about history anymore. I know the disastrous consequences of anti-globalization. You know it, Mark knows it, but that doesn't mean it won't happen.
Yes, I think we have competitive devaluations to some extent.
That's what I'm afraid of.
I think that is, and in the end, everybody will just debase the currency, and then all currencies will be bad, except the hard currencies, a basket of commodities and hard assets. That's why real estate is firm. It's unusual that real estate is up 3 years into a bear market.
Do you worry about the quality of economic and political leadership in terms of, having some vision of?
I can think of no good politician of the past 30 or 40 years other than the guy who's running Singapore. I mean, he's been an absolute genius. 40 years ago, Singapore didn't exist. Now it's the most successful developed country in the world.
Yeah.
In the past 40 years.
It gets
there's no second compared to Singapore.
It's really quite incredible.
It's done it on its own.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, can you name any other politician who's got any? I mean, the Chinese to some extent, but other than the Chinese.
Deng Xiaoping
yeah,
was a great
he's dead.
leader,
Pretty smart.
because he was a revolutionary. Because at the time he moved to a market economy.
Right,
it
but he's
wasn't
dead.
accepted thing to do in China.
But now, so you're optimistic.
Mildly optimistic.
What would you buy? What would you do? You keep your money in the U.S. You would move to the U.S.
Well, see, I'm not a big investor like you guys.
Doesn't matter. You're a visionary.
No,
That's why you're here.
We only
hope
have
you're a
one big
visionary.
investor, is Jimmy.
Yeah, right.
We are to.
Come on.
I'm a humble analyst.
Dan, you're here to teach us then, okay? Let's look at it that way. What would you do? You're 56 years old. What would you do with your assets?
Well, I think as a result of tonight's dinner, I'll have to kind of rethink my asset allocation.
The world is now at a fascinating juncture because 3.5 billion people joined the global marketplace and the capitalistic system as a result of the breakdown of communism. And there's so many cross currents. They are on the one hand producers and deflate the prices of fax machines, cell phones, PCs. At the same time, they're consumers. They'll buy energy, they'll buy food and so forth, so they'll push the prices of certain things up. I think the next 10 years, I would be long essentially resource-based economies. I would even invest in Argentina today and Brazil because the price level is so low. And I'd invest some money in New Zealand and in Australia and some money in gold in a safe deposit box because I think the responsible central bankers force you to be your own central bank and have some own reserves. In general, Asian price levels are low. Real estate is low in countries like Thailand.
Do you think so?
Here's a Swiss.
Right.
So let's go have coffee.
Okay. Well, just one last question before we go. Okay. So do you all think that, we've had, of course, the collapse in stock markets and so forth. Do you think we still have a lot more collapse to go through?
As far as I'm concerned, the bear market in shares in the U.S. is not over, which does not mean we can't have a good year or two. Yeah.
So you could see it, an 80% decline from
the Japanese mutual fund industry has lost 95% of its assets since 1990. The American mutual fund industry is still fat and happy. They're sassy. They think things are great. Their guys making lots of money. Nobody's felt any pain yet. But let's go have coffee.
Okay.
Because I want to move. I've just come from around the world. I want to live in Shanghai. I want to live in Angola. I want to live, a lot of places I want to live. Well, I say.